This programme was produced at and first aired on MPR, Manawatu People's Radio, with support from New Zealand On Air. Ka pai Irarangi Te Motu, MPR.
Kia ora and welcome to Reserved Recommendations. This is a show about great trash, difficult art, and our complicated relationships with art and culture. My name's Hugh, I'm the host of the show, and I'd like to take this opportunity to put in a very mild content warning for the show as a whole. Sometimes our recommendations on this show are reserved just because the thing that we're discussing is in some way not good, but sometimes there are aspects of the art or artist that may be confronting for some people. Check the episode descriptions for more information, and do be aware of your listening environment. This is another episode of Reserved Recommendations. This is a radio show and podcast produced by Manawatu People's Radio, Te reo irirangi o ngā tangata o Manawatu with the support of New Zealand On Air, so cheers for that, guys. This evening I am joined by, now I didn't actually check this before we started, Erin, do you go by McLean? McLean, yeah. Lived in Scotland for a while, and so that seems intuitively like the correct way to say it.
Yeah, well, that's where our family's lineage was from. So,
but you never know. Like,
no,
people had do all kinds of weird things to Scottish names once they hit New Zealand.
Well, I think the first 15 years of my life, I just sort of used them both interchangeably.
Yeah. Anyway, Erin McLean, what would I call you? Like sort of theatrical person about town. I'm sure you do other things as well, but I've primarily encountered you doing Shakespeare and other important theatrical stuff.
So I guess I'd just call myself artist in general. I do a bit of writing. I sell illustration stuff at markets. I've done illustrations for books. But the main thing I'm sort of doing with my time nowadays is theatre, whether that's some of Shakespeare or doing my own theatre.
Most recently being the Duchess of, I forget which town it is in the play, but in The Tempest, which was really cool. That was,
yes.
It was neat to see.
Yeah, so the Queen of Naples in The Tempest. Yeah, so she sort of starts in this journey of evil, villainy, very stereotypical evil Shakespearean tyrant. And through the events of the play, she sort of has to realise that evil's not really working for her and she has to work towards redemption. And then there's the really beautiful final scene where we reconcile with the main character and I reunite with my son. Yeah, so it was definitely one of the more layered things I've ever done in theatre, which was really fun.
I was really impressed with it. So, good work to you and the rest of the team. That was
I was really proud of how it turned out from everyone.
That was a really cool production. Yeah. Part of the reason that I'm sort of digressing and talking about all of this theatre stuff is that I got in touch to see if you'd be interested in being on the show. And one of the movies that you suggested, which I sort of jumped on because it's kind of a classic, but I'd never seen it, is David Cronenberg's The Fly.
Yes.
Which, having watched it, is kind of a theatrical tragedy of a gross, gloopy body horror movie.
Yeah, and I think that's what really draws me to it as well, is I think most people just hear about it because they hear about like the body horror aspect and how great the effects are and all that.
And that's true.
That's all, totally valid. It's effects-wise, it's a marvel still. But the thing that really sort of took me back when I first watched it is, it is a tragedy first and foremost, which is something that I love in horror. I love when we take the time to actually see these people as real human beings instead of just someone who exists only to be killed eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess like the thing that I really like about the movie is that Jeff Goldblum's character, Seth Brundle, he's a tragic hero, and the arc of his tragedy leads to him becoming the villain of the movie, Yeah,
it's a very sort of traditional Shakespearean tragedy in that sense. You have someone who starts with a lot of status, a lot of respect. He's still kind of an outcast and he's still kind of weird, but we know that scientific-wise he's
he's a guy who's been so focused on his work that he's been shut away from society. But you see now, I am the worst at names, so I'm going to call him Gina Davis. I can't remember her actual character's name.
Veronica, I believe. Ronnie.
Right. Yes, absolutely. When he encounters Veronica at the party, he right at the start of the movie, he is like charming. odd but charming. He's not
Yeah.
like a guy who can't function socially.
Yeah. So he starts off, again, like any other sort of main tragic figure, someone with a lot of respect and a lot of potential with this one sort of flaw that we know is eventually going to spiral into something else. And in this case, it's that sort of social awkwardness, not reading social cues, because that's what eventually leads him to get drunk and stumble into the portal, which leads to his end eventually. And he becomes obviously more sinister by the end. People start dying. And by the end, the most honourable thing he can do for himself is just ask Veronica to kill him. So,
absolutely. So can I ask at what point in your movie watching career you encountered this? Because obviously, like, it's a horror classic, and I'm watching it at 43 years of age, which is, pretty late considering it's a movie from the 80s. But I guess I'm curious as to whether a lot of people have this seminal, like, encountering something powerful and dark and weird way too young thing. And I'm wondering if that's a core experience for you or if you came to it later.
Not so much. I came to it later. There was definitely some horror movies I sought out the second I turned like 15, 16 kind of thing. But no, The Fly I only saw for the first time around 2021 it would have been. I think, like a lot of people, I knew the story of it before, either just from the original movie or the Simpsons parody of it, like everything is.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is one of those movies, I call them Casablanca movies because it's the first time that I encountered it.
Yeah.
Where occasionally you think, this is a little bit derivative, and then you realize it's because you've seen so many other things that are riffing on it that it feels slightly derivative sometimes in retrospect.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. And I think something that The Fly kind of started that a lot of horror movie nowadays try and cash in on is that whole advertising gimmick of, we needed people outside the movie theaters, like paramedics, ambulances, because this movie is just so distressing. I don't know how true that is for any generic CG movie that comes out today, but it was the case for The Fly. So.
Yeah, it was also a marketing gimmick that they used for things like
The Exorcist, I think, was the other main one.
Yeah, but they also used it for some of the like 50s B movies where they relied on gimmicks like having a little feathery thing that zipped under your seat so it would like tickle your legs in the middle of the show. Yeah. And they were trying to claim that gave people heart attacks. So it's sort of a perennial strategy.
I think they should bring that back. That sounds interesting. I've never heard of that before, like having people actually in the movie theater.
Yeah, there was that. There was another one. I think it was like a low-powered, essentially like a hot wire from an electric fence for a movie called The Tingler. And it had this moment where we were like, The Tingler is in the theatre. And then people would start getting these little jolts through their chairs.
It sounds like a great classic, like B-movie comedy horror title.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that it was comedy. I think it was one of these things where, the conceit has aged very poorly. But people were kind of throwing everything at the wall because, if it turned out that you were the guy who owned the patent on what turned out to be the next big thing, then you would make $5 million forever. So, I mean, to return to the art of the whole thing, the other thing that strikes me about Seth Brundle as a character, and this I suppose is another thing that chimes with the comparisons that we've been making to Shakespeare, is that he's weirdly poetic.
Yeah, and again, I think that sort of helps us really feel for him, because like my personal favourite scene in the movie is sort of the last time he sees Veronica before he tells her, I'm going to hurt you have to get away, and he gives this really strange but really beautiful speech about insects don't have politics, they're ruthless. I want to become the first insect politician. Which is such a strange line to hear out of context. But when you've watched the movie and you've seen what's happened to this guy, it's quite a poignant...
Yeah, because it's like the thing that it does really cleverly is it's trying to give you, or I feel like, I mean, obviously I haven't interviewed David Cronenberg, but I feel like what it's trying to do is it's trying to give you insight to this guy who's very intelligent and has a very scientific mind. Like one of the things that you see as he undergoes this awful transformation is that he starts off completely horrified by it, but as it goes on and he gets used to the horrors that have befallen him and waits for new ones to arrive, he starts like cataloguing all of the bits of his body that have fallen off and carefully storing them away for later
And it's just
study.
that sort of scientist mind that's just what he knows.
And so he's got this very analytic, very scientific, very curious mind, and he's very intelligent, but he's also got this like parallel bug consciousness that is sort of growing in his mind at the same time. And so you're getting this they're attempting to portray this guy who is kind of having these two kinds of thoughts at once, and he's trying to square them while he's making this speech. Yeah,
and I guess you can also look at it as the way he sort of analyzes it and the way he sort of almost makes peace with it is just that's the only way he can cope with a situation like that is through humour or through just acceptance. Because again, something I think the movie does really well is even though this is clearly in the realms of fiction, this is not something that would ever happen to any of us. The emotion behind it and the feeling is very real. We get that sense of dread, that horror, that feeling of almost losing your mind and body to this horrible, inescapable disease, essentially. And we sort of see the way he copes with that. He tries to convince himself this might be something that becomes really interesting. I think he says it outright. Everyone wants to become something else at some point. And he takes the time to sort of enjoy the fact that he can walk on walls now. And I think that sort of compounds the tragedy as we're just seeing him try to make sense of it.
Yeah, and it kind of moves faster than he can keep a handle on as well, right?
Like, yeah, it does. But at the same time, it's also slow enough that he can tell that it's happening.
Yeah.
And I think maybe the reason the film strikes such a chord with me is that's one of my primal fears. I'm really scared of the concept of losing yourself, whether it be through things like dementia or Alzheimer's, that idea of, losing your sense of self and it happening just slowly enough for you to realize.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what's happening here.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, he develops this thing that flies do, which is like he spits up a digestive enzyme and then he
dissolves the food.
Dissolves
and that's how
food. And the first time he does that in the movie, he does it without thinking about it. And then he goes, oh, well, that's disgusting. Yeah. But the change had already happened before he had a chance to track it. And then he has a very human reaction to his own bug action, which is...
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, without wanting to get too personal, I was struck by your mention of being really afraid of I guess cognitive change that kind of sneaks up on you. Do you have experience with watching people go through that?
A little bit, without going into too much detail. Yeah, I am in the process of very slowly losing a grandparent to dementia. They're in their 90s now. Physically, they're still totally fine. They're doing really well. But yeah, things like their memory is non-existent. I don't know if they remember their children or not anymore.
So, I mean...
And I guess that's something that's terrifying to me, is that idea of the people you love suddenly becoming strangers, you losing all of your independence and having to rely on other people. Because there was a time when I had to stay in hospital for about a month because of heart failure. And one of the things you see a lot is the way that nurses are treated and how overworked they are, and having to do things like change people in their 70s and 80s who have soiled themselves, having to deal with abuse from family members or from the patients themselves. And I'd hate to think that I ever become old enough or lose that
Yeah.
enough that I start becoming like that towards other people.
No, absolutely. I mean, my mum is in care with dementia right now, and one of the which is I guess why I asked, because that is a thing that I'm dealing with as well. And one of the things that went with her first was before cognitive stuff was mood. Right, she started getting really mean and angry with people that she never would have dealt with like that. And at a level of intensity that she never would have displayed.
Right. Yeah.
And so it really is like really alarming when someone who you feel like you know in that way suddenly changes, and the idea that could happen to you, because to her at least it seemed like at least the mood change was completely invisible. She just felt like that was a continuation of a natural way to be for her, you know?
Yeah. And I think that's sort of something that helps. Like, obviously, we've talked a bit about how sympathetic Seth is in his story arc. But yeah, I do think the heart of the movie, to an extent, is Gina Davis as Veronica. Because, again, that's something that we can kind of relate to, that horror of seeing someone we love slowly undergo this transformation for the worst.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
and it's genuinely heartbreaking how much she tries to stay with him even after seeing like his ears fall off.
Yeah, and like her whole arc once she's become locked in with him is like trying to find some way that she can support or help him, really.
Yeah.
Despite him being like alternately way too much and then shifting to being really hostile when she's unable to kind of follow him where he's trying to go.
Yeah. So we sort of see, again, those parallels of like the mood swings, the not really recognizing anymore the people that you love. And I do think it was intentional. I think, I believe David Cronenberg did sort of talk to the makeup effects team and with Jeff Goldblum a bit about that's what this movie is really about. It's about that sort of inevitability of death, how we deal with it, and how sometimes the most horrible thing in existence isn't some fantastical body horror or supernatural whatever. It is just that feeling of losing yourself, those very sort of, I guess, normal fears that a real person would go through.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess, and this is a thing that I know less about dealing with a person in the throes of, but I guess the other thing that the other dot that you could join to would be trying to deal with someone who's in the throes of some sort of really serious addiction.
Yeah.
Because he does the thing that the fly mutation initially does to him is it makes him better at basically everything for a really short while, but he becomes. It's sort of implied that he's in some ways like cognitively enhanced a little bit as well, because he becomes so energized. Like everything just seems better for a really limited amount of time.
Yeah, and I think that can also sort of be. I guess you could also look at it as, again, alcohol is ultimately what leads to his whole downfall. Because, for those that don't know, what happens that causes this horrible thing is he gets drunk one night, he drunkenly stumbles into the teleporter, completely unaware that there's a fly in there as well. And so that's how his genes get spliced in with the fly, and that's what begins this horrific mutation.
Yeah, and he's that's an act of impulsiveness brought on by
jealousy, insecurity,
jealousy, which is very much the result of him being like quite emotionally immature.
Yes,
he makes the assumption that Veronica's gone to her ex to get back together with him, rather than what's actually going on, which is she's telling him to leave her alone.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess that's. Now that we've come to that, that's something else in the movie that I think sometimes rubs people the wrong way is back in the 80s, the treatment of Veronica's ex, he would have just been seen as a pathetic loser, just kind of someone not that intimidating and just someone to be laughed at. Whereas now, and this was my sort of visceral reaction the first time I saw the movie back in 2021, is following a woman to her house, stalking, harassing, regardless of how weak and pathetic he seems to be, that's not something to be taken lightly. And I feel like maybe there's a extent of, because it is sort of played for laughs and not taken that seriously, it can kind of sometimes feel like the movie's almost trivializing sexual harassment, stalking kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, and it's like, in some ways it's a real time capsule, right? Because he is stalking and harassing and generally being a creep, but also the way that Ronnie has been socialized to deal with that is that, that basically she treats it as a form of almost like banter, where maybe someone's giving you, like they're giving you a friendly hard time, but they go a bit harder than they intend to, or than you're comfortable with. And so you kind of push back socially like that. But, I mean, she's essentially just tells him to fuck off in the way that you would a friend who was being a bit insensitive. Yeah,
and I guess the other reason they sort of try and play it that way is, of course, at the end, he sort of has to become the hero. He has to be the one who kind of saves her. So I guess you can't really have him be too...
I mean, he tries. It's not hugely effective.
No, it's not. But he is... there is kind of that quite sad parallel of we're really rooting for Seth at the beginning of the movie, and we see this guy as just kind of a loser. And as the movie goes on, and as Seth becomes more animalistic and the ex becomes more supportive of Veronica, like helping her through the process of having to get an abortion, and showing up at his lab at the end with a shotgun. Again, it's kind of gut-wrenching that by the end he's the one we're sort of having to root for.
Yeah, it is. And it's again, it's an interesting time capsule because, I mean, he's a surprisingly complicated character. Yeah. Like, he is kind of a creep to her, but at the same time, I think, you know, rightly, because a lot of people who treat women like that would be abusive creeps as well as just lecherous creeps. But he does this weird thing where he makes all of these advances which are unwanted. Yeah. But it doesn't really have any career consequences for her. Like, he'll say stuff and she'll be like, nah, fuck off, I'm not interested, leave me alone. Give me my key back. Why are you showering in my house? Yeah. Which is literally a thing that happens.
Yeah, no, and it's like, if you try to show that today, or just the idea of someone walking into your house and your ex that's been stalking you is in your shower.
Oh, absolutely.
That's terrifying.
A nightmare. And again, rightly, I think a modern movie who had your ex turn up in your house in your shower would make that a person who was trying to then wield their professional power over you because he's her boss. Yeah. And they met when I think he was her professor at university. I think that's the story. Like, so he's always had that level of professional or academic power over it. Yeah. But he never really abuses that element of their relationship.
Yeah, and I guess maybe it's just, again, because this was in the 80s, maybe the understanding that that's something that abusers do wasn't as much of an idea as it is now. Because obviously back in the 80s, we didn't know that, like, Harvey Weinstein was saying to these people, hey, if you speak up, I'm going to ruin your career. Obviously, Me Too wasn't really a movement back then. So maybe it was just, that's not really seen in the movie because people just didn't really know it was that big of an issue.
Yeah, well, certainly I imagine, like, male Canadian writer-directors wouldn't necessarily have a reason to know that was, like, it's one of those things that could have been willfully invisible to people, I suppose.
Yeah, and I guess, again, if they're trying to play his stalking and harassment as mostly lighthearted, then you don't really want to make it...
No, absolutely. Yeah. Like, it would be it would be like a double nightmare in a way that would kind of make the movie unwatchable if at the end of the movie she in some ways had to depend on this kind of alternative human monster to deal with the bug monster. That would be kind of too much, I feel like.
Yeah. And again, that sort of gets us that emotional response from the film is we feel really bad for Veronica, not just because of what's happening to her current love interest, but the fact she spends half the movie also being stalked by this other person, and how horrible it is that by the end of the movie, this ex that's been stalking her and shows up in her shower is sort of the only person she can rely on.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like that, no.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's interesting because like there's not a lot outside the dynamic of those three characters.
Yeah.
Like Seth brings in other people kind of randomly towards the end, very briefly, but like it really is kind of about the dynamic between the three of them for the most of the thing.
And I think that sort of helps us, again, view them as people, because obviously in theatre, you kind of have to be able to create as many roles as possible to create that ensemble, to create that idea that this world of this play is a community. Whereas, in this movie, we're just focusing on really just this one person's descent into madness and these two people he has there to sort of show.
Yeah, well, like to be, I guess, alternative human viewpoints or provide somewhere for the audience to stand in.
Yeah, because you also kind of look at it as, well, if they were to add more characters with more meaningful roles, well, realistically, what is there? That's not going to take away too much from what's important about the film, which, again, I think is that tragedy of watching just this one person lose himself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, thank you so much for coming.
Right.
I'm really enjoying this conversation. We are around about at the halfway mark,
Great.
So we're going to have to take a brief break for station messages, and we will be back right after this.
This programme was produced at and first aired on MPR, Manawatu People's Radio, with support from New Zealand On Air. Ka pai Irarangi Tamotu, MPR.
You're listening to Reserved Recommendations, a radio show and podcast about great trash, problematic faves, and difficult art. I would put this probably in the last category. I'm talking to Erin McLean about the movie The Fly by David Cronenberg. And it's difficult, really, in the sense that it is, we've been talking about kind of how high-minded it is in a lot of ways, but it is also a movie where you get to watch a guy's body slowly fall off of his inner bug carapace.
Right.
It is quite slimy and gooey and visceral. And I think like being both of those things at once is a real it's a real like knife edge walk at times, right?
Yeah. I think in terms of the body horror, I think what makes this movie work and the reason we empathize so well with him is because what we're seeing happen to him is actually there. I think the reason I have such a fondness for horrors from the 70s and 80s is they couldn't rely on CG as much as we do now. So every single stage of this transformation that we see Seth go through, and they show it in really slow, painstaking detail.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Every single state we see him in had to be created from scratch.
And it starts really early, right? Like immediately that he does the teleporter experiment and it goes wrong, he has the little patch of like fly hairs on his back.
And he's got these rashes, his hair becomes a bit more matted. And then slowly we see like his skin become more and more cracked. There's points where we see fly limbs sort of breaking out of his body. We see his flesh starting to tear. And it all just gets worse and worse and worse until it culminates in the end where his jaw just straight up rips off. And then we see the rest of his face kind of fall off and we see the fly underneath. And it's one of those movie scenes where it's like, even though I saw this movie for the first time a few years ago now, the memory of seeing that for the first time still sticks with me, which movies don't tend to do a lot.
No, absolutely. Like it's a really striking image, and it's kind of like the way, and because this was another movie that we mentioned when we had our initial conversation was The Thing.
Yes,
where like a lot of the stuff in The Thing doesn't look, you would say, necessarily realistic, but it's something about the fact that it's really
actually there
in the room and people are reacting to it as though it's real.
Yeah.
And similarly, like the face falling off stuff, like by that stage, they do kind of look like prosthetic effects, but there's such striking ones that it's,
Yeah, and it's just so far removed from anything you would see in modern horror. Because I feel like if this movie was to come out today, it would be shot a lot more dark, so to sort of hide the effects, and it would have just all been done in computers. And even if computers look more realistic, I think there is something to be said about that idea of we're seeing the same thing in that moment that Gina Davis is having to see. And the idea of, even if you know they're just prosthetics, someone in the corner of the room having their skin fall off in front of you is,
it's a weird experience. And actually, like, you know, it does, I occasionally, as I'm sure we all do, I fall into the Reels hole on somewhere like Instagram.
Yeah.
You know, you try and resist, but eventually the tide grabs you and you fall into the slop hole for a while. And one of the things that I saw was the process of putting like glass artificial eyes into a latex dummy head, as a little short video. And it's amazing how, even though you see it start really shapeless and then they sort of push it into the shape of a head and then push the eyes into place. Like, as the eyes go into place, it becomes suddenly really visceral because they're like, this is a human face switch and your brain suddenly turns on.
And that is kind of like another like guilty pleasure of mine, is if I ever do go down the Instagram reel rabbit hole, I do like seeing those kind of, or like makeup tutorials. One, because they're just really interesting to watch and you can tell these people have a lot of talent. But also if you are into like theatre or the arts and you want to have a look at making your own like short horror film or your own theatre show, it kind of gives you an idea, okay, this is how just any random teen on TikTok can make something that looks really effective.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's really interesting, I suppose, because you're limiting it down to just seeing like the effect reveal moment.
Yeah.
But you can
still see like the artistry behind it.
You can see the artistry and you can kind of figure out like which bit of it pushes the button in my brain that makes it suddenly feel wrong. Like the makeup artists who make their faces up to give themselves like extra eyes.
Yeah.
That's like weirdly effective because your brain's so keyed into spotting where people's eyes are so that you can connect with them.
Yeah.
So even though they don't really look like real eyes, they're close enough that your brain has to try and go back and forth and it freaks you out.
Yeah, and even if you are someone who looks at it like, oh, that's clearly fake, you can still admire the craftsmanship of it. Like, I don't think anyone's going to watch The Fly nowadays and be like, oh, this is definitely happening to this guy. You can tell that they're prosthetics, but even if you can tell that they're prosthetics, you still have a respect for how much time this must have taken, how long in total across the filming of it Jeff Goldblum would have had to sit in a makeup chair, and it must have been a nightmare.
Absolutely, because I'm trying to think, there's so many phases of the transition from Brundle to Brundlefly as well. And each of them is like subtly different, but would have required its own
something totally different.
Routine.
And obviously something that you learn if you do theatre or film is even if something looks like a really small change on film, it can still be tons of work behind the scenes.
Well, because you know, it also implies however many takes it took, and the more complicated a prosthetic is, or the more elaborate an appearance change is, the less chance that it's going to last very well. So, you know, the more retouching it would have taken to keep him in that state.
Sure. I haven't looked into exactly how long it would have taken him to be in that process, or heard Jeff Goldblum speak about his experience performing The Fly. I do know he was one of he wasn't the first actor they went to. They did go to a few people first, and they all just sort of had that initial response of, I do not want to spend hours of the day in a makeup chair putting on these really horrific prosthetics.
I mean, I think, you know, it's interesting that he wasn't the first choice because he's kind of perfectly cast.
He is, and I feel like this was pretty early in his career. I think, same with Gina Davis, I think this is one of the movies that sort of cemented them as, like, obviously we make fun of a lot of him nowadays for his accent and his sort of dialect. But I think it really works in this movie, and he really captures that sort of well-meaning and clearly intelligent, but sort of socially immature person that he is.
And like, it's interesting because we were talking about like the sort of emotional changes as he becomes Bug.
Yeah.
But actually Seth Brundle, to start with, is the kind of guy who can like accidentally turn a baboon inside out.
Yeah.
And that's like one of the first awful effects that
Yeah.
you see is he tries to teleport a baboon to show Veronica what the process is, and it's just disastrous and horrifying. But you see he's quite like almost tender with the other one of the pair of baboons that he has.
When it goes successfully and it runs straight into his arms.
Yeah, and so like he does have this weird dichotomy, because his reaction to the first baboon turning inside out is not like abject horror. It's kind of frustration more than anything else.
Yeah, because there's a great deleted scene that was cut because they thought it made Seth too unsympathetic, where he's deep into the transformation at this point and he's just desperately trying to figure out how to undo it. So he puts a cat in one of the telepods and the same baboon in the other one to teleport them and see if they can get the same result of they merge together. And they do. That comes out as this really horrific, disgusting half ape, half cat thing making these really horrific noises. And he tries to put it back in the teleporter to try and see if he can figure out how to undo it. And it just attacks him. So just without a second thought, he just grabs a crowbar and just beats it to death. So that was ultimately cut because, again, they felt it made him too unsympathetic.
I could see that.
It does show that sort of, one, his desperation as he realizes how bad the situation is getting, but also that sort of scientific mind of, I'm going to try and replicate what's happened to me to try and figure out if I can undo it.
Yeah, and like I can be quite... I can hold a living creature in quite high regard and still be entirely willing to sacrifice it in the name of the thing I'm trying to do.
Yeah, and like I said, I think it's a great sign of how bad his situation has become. Because you'd kind of like to think he wouldn't have done that near the start of the movie, especially when you see how happy he is to see the orangutan when it goes successfully.
So, I mean, have you... I haven't. Have you watched broader into David Cronenberg's filmography? Because he's kind of known as like the body horror guy.
Yeah, not as much. I've seen a lot of the work that his contemporaries or people that have followed in his footsteps, like Junji Ito, have done. I guess I've always just sort of been, for the most part, I don't instantly look at a person who's made a film and be like, yes, I instantly want to go seek out the rest of their stuff. I tend to view movies sort of reasonably self-contained.
That's very sensible and disciplined of you. I kind of do the opposite. I find a person who's done a thing that I think is really cool, and then I try and find everything else they've done to see if it's also like the same thing. But I think that's a personal mental tendency to try and draw circles around things and put them in sets, which is perhaps not necessarily the best thing to do with art.
Yeah, and I found sometimes, because there's a few directors where I've been like, oh, I really love this movie of theirs, I'm going to go see the rest. And maybe it's just because we see the original and the most iconic first, but everything after that sometimes kind of feels like just a...
And, you know, like some people... It kind of depends what kind of a job they're doing, right?
Yeah.
Like I think of Duncan Jones, who made. Do you know Duncan Jones?
No, I don't. I don't recognize the name.
He's David Bowie's wee boy. He changed his name from Zowie to Duncan so that he would be less immediately identifiable as David Bowie's kid. He made a movie called Moon, which is about a guy by himself in the moon base, slowly working out the awful secret of his existence.
Yeah.
And it's really cool. It's a really, really neat bit of kind of high concept, mid-budget, very character-driven science fiction, which gets like the absolute most out of its one actor for most of the time. He also made the Warcraft movie.
Okay.
Which is kind of it has its defenders, but is generally regarded as like one of these monumentally expensive lemons that happens when people dump a vast amount of money into a video game movie.
Yeah.
And it's like one job had one set of rules and one had another, and so you kind of can't draw a line between them there.
Yeah, and I guess that's another reason I don't always just instantly hail the praises of a director is, again, since I've done theatre myself, you know, that there's tons of people's work that goes into it, and there's a wide spectrum in movies of how much the director has total creative control and how much they are bound by the producers and what the studio heads want. And then you've also you have to acknowledge the work of the actors, and the star of The Fly really is the effects team. And it's something really small, but something I really appreciated is after the film, when the credits roll, the very first people that are credited are the effects team and the people that created this monster, rather than instantly going into like the director or the cast like you normally would. I really respect that, the effects team sort of get top billing in this film.
Yeah, well, I mean, they absolutely do make it because, like we've been talking about, the kind of tragedy of Seth Brundle and all of the stuff that is happening to him, it's absolutely, I guess it's paced by, or it's balanced by the pace and the scope of all the things that happen.
And how agonizingly slow his transformation is. And again, how every single stage of that transformation, and there's like 7 or 8 different forms we see him in, would have had to have been created from scratch by this makeup team.
That's right. They're all visually distinct, and they get a lot of mileage towards the start of the movie by having Jeff Goldblum just act through it as though he feels like he's completely unchanged. Yeah. But you're looking at him with these like weird hairs and stuff all over his face, and he's, his hair's gone strange, but he's acting like he's just having a particularly good morning.
Yeah, so there's also that element in horror that I really love of it doesn't need to rely on jump scares. It is very much that kind of slow burn feel. Like, as soon as he stepped out of the teleporter, before you've seen anything, that something has had to have gone wrong. And so then the remaining hour or so of the movie is just the slow feeling of dread, as how you see, like, first he's got these really strange hairs on his face, then you start to see the rashes, then you see him crawling up walls. And it's that really slow, painful, you're just having to spend an hour of this film time resigned to the fact that something really horrific is going to happen to this dude.
And that, I mean, to return to the start of our conversation, is the fundamental trick of a tragedy, is to tell you up front that this guy is fucked. Yeah. And then usually with Shakespeare's tragedies, at least, he sets up why they're fucked pretty obviously to start
from the start. Yeah, like Romeo and Juliet has the chorus right at the beginning saying, these 2 kids are dead, here's how it happened.
Yeah.
And most of them make their sort of tragic, pivotal mistake that causes the whole events right at the start of the play.
Yeah. Iago stands up the front and tells you exactly what he's going to do.
From the start,
and how, and then he does all of those things and you just watch.
Exactly. Yeah. And I guess on that specific example of Othello, I kind of would be really interested to see Othello done as like a traditional horror movie. Because again, even if it's not necessarily that bloody or gory compared to other Shakespeare's plays, there is that horror of watching the sociopath completely ruin someone's life for no other reason than petty spite. And that primal horror and that realistic horror of, this could be your best friend. Because Othello believes to the ends of the earth that Iago's his blood brother.
Absolutely. And the horror for everybody else of watching Othello become this sort of rage monster, right? Like because I mean, it's hard to know in what way Shakespeare would have conceptualized it that way, because I'm sure considerations around like domestic violence were very different in Elizabethan England than they are now.
Yeah.
But it is a story about a man who gets so angry and unstable and distrustful that he destroys everything that he values and literally destroys all of the people that he holds dear.
And the more sympathetic you make Othello at the start, the more you feel that sense of tragedy. It is one of the plays that I do at some point down the line want to have a look at. It is just that the Palmerston North theatre community as a whole is pretty whitewashed, if you've seen the last few Summer Shakespeare.
Yes, I mean, it's... And the thing about Othello is that, again, Shakespeare probably wouldn't have considered it to be about race, because race wasn't really conceptualized in the same way in Elizabethan England. But because it's textually about the one black guy in this community.
Yeah.
It is unavoidably about race when we do it now.
I think as a general, it's meant to be more about just jealousy and insecurity in general, because even before Iago spins this web, Othello is still kind of insecure about the fact that this girl he's with is white, she's a lot younger, everyone around him sort of thinks she can do better. Even if they're not saying it, he does still kind of feel that sort of judgment and that racism, whether or not it's actually there. And that's arguably the greatest tragedy of the play is by the end of it, when Othello's become this murderous monster, the worst thing Iago has done is kind of reinforced that racist belief that this is just what men of colour were like. Like, Othello's done all of this work to appear as like the noble warrior and the noble lover, and Iago has just gone and completely undone all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And in many ways by like weaponizing societal expectations about what Othello must necessarily be like. Yeah, look, well, I look forward to that if you ever manage to do it, because it sounds great. But like you say, it is a really, really tricky one to do when you've got mostly a white group of actors to pull
And it's not one of those plays where, like, sometimes you'll be like, oh, this character is different in some way, like they're gay or they are just a woman or something. So you look at maybe making them another sexuality, or you make them a woman to sort of highlight that inequality, I think. No, quite an important part of the story is the race aspect.
Yeah.
Even if plot-wise it's not actually that relevant. And in the play itself, he's only referred to as being black 4 times in the entire play.
Yeah, and you know, one tries to avoid quoting the works of Neil Gaiman in these particular times.
Right, yeah.
But there is a whole thing in one of his books, because despite his many flaws, he is a reasonably competent historian when he bothers to do his research, where a black woman is dressed up as a noblewoman for essentially like a Ren Fair kind of thing, and she is very self-conscious about how she doesn't feel like she fits the part.
Yeah.
And the guy she's with is at pains to point out that, you know, there were all through Spain and the bits of Europe that touch Spain, there were remnants of Moorish nobility kind of into Shakespeare's time. Yeah. So like rich, powerful, socially well-connected black people were not that, like not common, but not that uncommon at the time.
So when's the podcast about Neil Gaiman coming out?
Oh, I did a
I can talk about how much I love Coraline as well.
Yeah,
till the ends of the year.
Look, if you want to come back and do I did one by myself, but if you want to do an unpacking Neil Gaiman stuff, that absolutely, there's a lot there, and there's a really interesting. There's this woman called Elizabeth Sandifer, who's been writing a long. I guess you would call it. It's like a non-fiction novel in the form of a series of blog posts.
Okay.
Elizabeth Sandifer is a practicing occultist and sort of religious ritual magician who draws from the works of William Blake in her occult practice.
Okay.
And she has written this thing called The Last War in Albion, which is a history of British comics from the 1980s to today, conceived as a magical war between Alan Moore and Grant Morrison.
Okay.
Both of whom are comics writers who are also wizards. And her chapter on Neil Gaiman posits that the point at which his work starts to fall to bits a bit is the point at which he also starts progressing from someone who just kind of has an unfortunate habit of hooking up with fans to becoming like the abuser that we now know him as, and that those processes are sort of psychically and because this is Elizabeth Sandifer, like magically related. It's really interesting, even if you don't necessarily buy like the ritual magic side of it.
Yeah, and I think I've always sort of gone back and forth on the idea of like separating art from the artist. I don't think it's necessarily impossible, but
It's a lot harder when they're alive and making money from it.
Yeah, like when Roman Polanski is dead, I'll be able to enjoy Rosalind's Baby a lot easier, Rosemary's Baby. But especially the thing that they've done, it does sort of make you look at their work in a different way. Like if someone who writes romance novels or writes these novels about powerful women characters is then revealed to be a sexual abuser, it's like, okay, well, he clearly doesn't value women the same way he seems to in these texts he writes. So it does kind of put a stain on them in that way.
No, absolutely. And the other experience, and this is kind of retreading the solo episode I did, but the experience I had with Neil Gaiman and this other British comics and kind of science fiction author called Warren Ellis is that I was a fan of them, and then I noticed, without really noticing that I was noticing it, that I was kind of getting over their work a bit.
Right.
Just that they felt to me like they were maybe becoming a bit repetitive, or that they had identified a thing that people responded to, and they were kind of leaning into that too hard in a way that felt a bit pandering.
Yeah.
And then both of them had these revelations that they were behaving abusively with fans and colleagues. And it was really interesting, again, to read that Elizabeth Sandifer piece, which kind of tried to directly link those things. But in both of those cases, it wasn't so much that I felt that they'd been hypocritical, although they had been. It was more that I was like, I'd been slowly feeling like there was something not right, that their work wasn't quite where it had been for a while.
Right.
And that's the revelation that they were being awful kind of made that a lot more stark in retrospect, I guess.
Right. I'm sort of lucky I've never had that situation where someone I've really loved and admired has come out to be a horrible person. When I was in the UCL Performing Arts School, a lot of people were fans of Michael Jackson, and that was around the time the stuff about him came out. And just seeing that sort of internal struggle of really admiring and appreciating this guy's work, and also realizing it's not even really opinion, it's a fact that without him, the music world will be totally different. But
absolutely.
Still having to acknowledge this horrible thing he's done. I do consider myself very lucky that no one whose work I've ever held in super high regard has ever been outed as having something like that.
Well,
because I enjoyed Coraline, but that's like the only one of his work that I've really sought out, and it did start more from a love of the movie rather than the books. So.
Yeah. So for context, I was a teenager when the first kind of collected trades of Sandman was coming out.
Right.
And so I was kind of at the perfect age for that to be like, someone understands reality the correct way. And so I hit those things very hard. But, long may it continue that it hasn't happened to you, but people are people, and some people do awful things.
Yeah, and you just sort of have to accept, even if you don't necessarily see it just because of the culture and the way it is, most people in Hollywood probably are horrible people, even if it hasn't.
Well,
I do think I am one of those people that thinks fame and money does just have a way of changing you.
I think
for
so.
The worst.
And I think also you probably can't achieve the kind of fame and money that people who are hyper visible achieve without, at the very least,
screwing some other people over.
Well, being kind of ruthless. Yeah,
for sure.
You have to, at the very least, be the kind of person who's willing to make some tough decisions in their own favor, and that probably means stepping on some people. So exactly. Look, we are coming up on time. That was a great digression. I really enjoyed it. It wasn't really what we were talking about, but thank you so much for indulging in it with me. It was
That's
good
all right.
fun.
I was really curious to see what else we'd end up discussing aside from The Fly. I didn't think a fella would be one of them, and I'm really happy it was.
Well, so I'd like to do two things by way of wrapping up. The first is to ask if you've got anything else that you would recommend that hits similar notes to The Fly. I mean, obviously we've been talking about like tragedy in general and Shakespearean tragedy in particular, but is there other stuff?
So Shakespearean tragedies. The other one would be, I'm a fan of just 70s and 80s horror in general. Yeah, so we mentioned The Thing very briefly. The other movie that I hold in super high regard, one of my favourite films of all time, is The Exorcist. Mm-hmm. It touches on very much the same sort of things as The Fly, even though it's a supernatural horror. At the heart of it is just this poor mother trying to save her child from, again, this unseen, slowly encroaching horror. And you feel for her pain and for the child's pain.
Absolutely, yeah. The one that I would recommend if you like the combination of a kind of tragic story with that sort of like weirdly positive and then very negative arc to it, classic practical slimy gooey effects would be An American Werewolf in London.
Yes. Yeah.
That has a sort of similar arc of following the hero through a gradual transformation that leads to a tragic conclusion, and it adds a gimmick to werewolf lore that if you're a werewolf, you're haunted by the slowly decaying ghost of everyone you'd killed, which means that he's followed by these increasingly slimy and weird zombie creatures who are constantly trying to convince him to kill himself. And like it leans a bit more into comedy. Yeah. But, Romeo and Juliet's a comedy until people start dying.
Yeah, it's not even listed as officially as a tragedy. It is a tragicomedy. And I feel like there are probably some people that enjoy The Fly in respect of seeing these practical effects. Well, they think it's hilarious seeing what happens to him because they can tell that it's fake.
Absolutely. And it's like the dialogue until he starts kind of tragically speechifying, it is almost in the tradition of kind of screwball comedy, everyone's very quick and very witty and has a sharp retort to each other all the time. And so, it is that very kind of engaging, funny,
definitely
witty thing right up until people start dying. The other thing that I would recommend checking out, this is purely because it's connected to Cronenberg, and I haven't seen that much commentary about it, and I personally thought it was really interesting, is check out David's wee boy Brandon. Brandon Cronenberg is also a filmmaker who leans into some body horror stuff. He has a movie that is on Netflix right now. I think it's like a Netflix original called Infinity Pool.
I've heard the title. I haven't seen it yet.
So the conceit is it's about a guy who's in this sort of slightly unstable, not very happy marriage. And he goes with his wife whose money he's dependent on. So he's a novelist who did one book. And he's kind of failing to come up with the other, and they're living on her family's money. They go to this resort in this obscure fictional Eastern European country, and he gets into a traffic accident, and he discovers that the legal code in that country stipulates that any foreigner convicted of a serious crime must be executed, and there are no exceptions. There's no leniency. There's no way to avoid execution, except to avoid having international incidents when they execute all of these foreigners. They have developed a technology where they can clone you and execute your clone in your place. And he sort of, having undergone this process, he meets a community of expats who've also undergone this process. And they treat it as this sort of rite of passage into this weird hedonistic world where there's kind of no consequences for their actions anymore, and everything gets very weird and unpleasant, as you would expect. But I haven't heard a lot of people talk about it, so I would be keen for more people to put eyeballs on David's wee boy Brandon and see what they think of him. The last thing I like to do is give you a chance to plug your stuff. I know that you have produced things with Find Our Productions Sexy or FOPS. Are there other, I guess, places to follow you around and find out what you're up to?
Yeah, so obviously FOPS Performing Arts on Facebook is where most of my theatre stuff happens. We do one massive show once every 2 years. And in terms of art stuff, which is where you also see a lot of my sort of love for horror and sort of visual storytelling, just on Instagram, Erin's Art and Alligators, alligator spelled with an E, all one word. And that's just sort of where I share some of the stuff I do in terms of art, in terms of creature design. And I sort of just talk about what I think makes a great horror, a great emotional storytelling through imagery. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming.
That's right. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to Reserved Recommendations, a radio show and podcast from Manawatu People's Radio, Te Reo Irirangi o ngā tangata o Manawatu. The show was produced and presented by me, Hugh Dingwall, and I also composed our theme music. It's called Sack Jazz, and you can find it at wolfboy.bandcamp.com. If you enjoyed this show, why not go ahead and share it with a friend? You can find the last 10 episodes of this show at npr.nz/show/reserved on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you get your podcasts. If you want an episode older than that, try searching for Reserved Recommendations on YouTube. You can find me at Objective Reality on Blue Sky or send emails to objectivereality@gmail.com. You can also follow Reserved Recommendations on Facebook or Instagram. And finally, Manawatu People's Radio is a non-profit community access station. If you like this or any other piece of their fine audio programming, why not fling them $1 or $2? You can go to npr.nz/donate for more information on how to do that.